ready to go. You're listening to By Land and by Sea, powered by the Maritime Professor. When most people hear cargo theft, they probably picture the opening scene from maybe the Fast and the Furious. Cars surrounding a tractor trailer, a highway takeover, a very obvious crime. But cargo today looks a lot less like Hollywood, and maybe not at all like Hollywood, and a lot more like a legitimate transaction. A stolen identity, false paperwork, a compromised email account, a real driver delivering a real shipment right to the criminals. So what does cargo theft actually look like today? How has it changed? And how does law enforcement have the tools to keep up? Let's talk about it. That's what we're talking about today with our guest, Scott Cornell. Hi, welcome back to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor, former Federal Maritime Commission International Affairs attorney, and founder of Squall Strategies. By Land and by Sea is your go-to resource for navigating the regulatory side of global ocean shipping. And me? I'm your favorite maritime attorney, aren't I? As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. There is no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So let's get into it because, as you know, ocean shipping moves the world. All right, like I said at the outset, today I'm joined by Scott Cornell, Chief Risk Officer and Transportation Crime and Theft Specialist at SPG Cargo and Logistics. Scott has spent more than 30 years investigating cargo theft and transportation crime, along with internal theft, embezzlement, and corporate investigations. Before joining Logistics, he spent 25 years at Travelers, where he led the transportation division and helped establish the insurance industry's first fully dedicated cargo theft unit, known as the Special Investigations Group. He also serves as chairman of TAPA Americas, the Transported Asset Protection Association, and sits on the TIA's Cargo Fraud Task Force. In our conversation, we talk all about how Scott even got into this work, from just doing a couple of deliveries with a truck. That's how we started. What TAPA Americas does, how cargo theft has changed over the past 5 years. The difference, we get into the nitty gritty a little bit. We go through the difference between straight cargo theft and strategic cargo theft. We still see more straight cargo theft, as he says, but strategic cargo theft is really one of those things that makes you think. We talk about what keeps them up at night and what CORCA, there's a bill going through Congress right now. CORCA, what it could actually change for investigations and prosecutors. All right, we're going to get right into it. Enjoy my conversation with Scott Cornell. My guest today is Scott Cornell, Chief Risk Officer and Transportation Crime and Theft Specialist at Logistics. Scott has spent more than 30 years investigating cargo theft and transportation crime, along with internal theft, embezzlement, and corporate investigations. Before joining Logistics, he spent 25 years at Travelers, where he led the transportation division and helped establish the insurance industry's first fully dedicated cargo theft unit, known as the Special Investigations Group. Scott works closely with law enforcement and cargo theft task forces across the country and has advised federal policymakers on cargo theft and supply chain security. He's testified before Congress in support of cargo theft legislation and worked directly with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, on strategic cargo theft. He also is currently serving as the chairman of TAPA Americas, the Transported Asset Protection Association, and sits on the Transportation Intermediaries Association Cargo Fraud Task Force. Scott is widely recognized as one of the country's leading experts. I call him the country's leading expert, but he's one of the leading experts on cargo theft prevention and recovery. And I am so glad to have him here today. Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's always good to see you, my friend, and good to get time to talk about this issue and get the word out. That's just what we're trying to do, right? Educate everybody on it. Just one small thing. Our company is merged now, so we're SPG Cargo and Logistics. So that's the new company that combines the two companies that merged. It's good, great company. So it's been a good move.
That's great. Congratulations. The more power, the better, because you got to go get those bad guys. So this is good.
Right.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being here. I think that this is such a wonderful topic to bring to my listeners. Like I've said many times, we tend to be more on the maritime side of things, but that interchange between where the ports and the yards receive that cargo and the cargo goes out. It's such an important piece to dive in a little bit more on the conversation of supply chain and cargo theft security, that I'm really excited to dive into that and talk about that a little bit more. But as I do with all my guests when they're first on the show, I want to know a little bit more about you. I want my listeners to know a little bit more about you. Knowing the person behind the work sometimes gives us a little bit more of a glimpse on why you're doing the things that you're doing and where you're moving. So before we get into all these threats, tell me a little bit more about you. How did you get into this? Where did you study? Were you always drawn to cargo theft? Did you have a theft career and then you turned over to the good guys? No, I figured not. But let me know a little bit more. Let's talk about how cargo theft became this problem you wanted to spend your career working on.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that interesting of a story or intriguing of a story, but I went to college and my goal was to become a lawyer. And so I had to pay for every penny of my own college. I got my 4-year degree and then said, okay, I need to save some money up for law school and then decide where I could go to law school and afford to go to law school. And in that year off, all through college, I had driven truck. I drove flatbed for a building supply company full-time in the summer and then during school on the weekends. Prior to college, I drove a box truck in Buffalo, New York, where I grew up. And so I understood the transportation industry, the trucking industry, the paperwork. On that year off I took between college, I was working security and doing some investigations. And we were doing security for a trucking company. And they had some stuff that was going missing in the warehouse. And my boss had me pose as an undercover employee on the night shift. And I figured out what was going on with that. And before you knew it, we were being asked to investigate some disappearing cargo at the time. And my boss at the time was like, hey, you drive truck, you understand this stuff, and you're going to be in charge of doing this. And I started doing it, and I started doing investigations in general. And I thought, I kind of really like this stuff. And I ended up getting a full-time offer at a PI company, which is where I started, and took that and never looked back. And then ended up having a company with some buddies and then getting hired at Travelers and asked to start the cargo theft team over there. So it just progressed, and it was almost like something I just got caught up in. I ended up being good at it. I enjoyed it. I became passionate about it early on and said, hey, I'm going to make a career out of this. And here I am.
That's so interesting too, to go from thinking that you were going to go to law school to then going into basically undercover agent, where you got to really research things. I feel like it scratches that same itch that lawyers, that curiosity, tend to have, right? There's all these bad jokes about lawyers, but ultimately it comes down to the kind of attention to detail, the wanting to learn more, the kind of wanting to dive into it. And early on, you were asked to do exactly that. You fast tracked the whole thing and got to be the undercover agent even within the own company. That's cool.
Yeah. And a lot of the investigations I worked back then, you mentioned it early on, I was blessed to have a lot of really good mentors that were really experienced or really well-known investigators who took me under their wing, sent me to different schools, interview and interrogation schools. And I worked for one guy in particular that was really known very well for interview and interrogation skills. And he taught me a lot. And so I did a lot of embezzlement, internal crime, stuff like that. So I wasn't always doing cargo in the beginning. That was actually very sporadic here and there, but I knew it, and I learned it. I knew it and I learned it and knew it over time is probably the better order of saying it. But all the other types of investigations I did, I was quite often interacting with lawyers, right? And building cases and doing case strategy and being prepared for testimony and things like that. So to your point, I felt like I was living in both worlds a little bit, nowhere near being an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV. But, I was living in that world where I was dealing with the bigger picture of it and dealing with attorneys all the time. And even today, when you look at this company that I'm at, I work with Justin Olson, who was, lead counsel for CR Logistics for years and now is working with us at SPG Cargo and Logistics. And he's a fantastic attorney. And I, and everything we do here, we talk to him almost daily, right? So I'm always intermingling with that. You and I become friends, and you're an attorney, Matt, the transportation lawyer, I'm always talking to lawyers and attorneys. So, and I didn't have to go to law school, and I don't have to do all the paperwork.
You get to do both. You get to do both. I mean, it really is the best of both worlds. Yeah, Matt Leffler is a good friend of the show, the armchair attorney. He's great. And actually, how we met, he was teaching at Michigan State.
That's right.
He had
That's
brought
right.
me on as a guest lecturer, and then I saw that he was doing a panel with you after, and I kind of snuck around and
Yeah.
stuck around and listened in. I was like, wait a second, this is interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, everything comes back to Matt. We'll have to tag him on the post here.
He hasn't, I'm a little disappointed. He hasn't been wearing the jacket consistently anymore.
The red jacket. Yeah. He saves it for the conferences now.
Right.
Yeah, but no, that's so interesting though, because so even though you went into private investigations that weren't necessarily cargo, because of that trucking experience that you had, it probably kind of naturally combined the two. You saw that problem early on, small scale, but still, I mean, that's really how the problem has grown in the supply chain. Is it started small scale and it just kind of kept getting more and more sophisticated. So let's talk a little bit more about what you're seeing out there. I mean, we have these image of Fast and the Furious, right? The opening scene, and you have all these Hondas that are chasing this big truck and pulling, getting all the cargo and all these, what was it, electronics or something out of the back. Now it's kind of less aggressive, but more impactful. And so we've seen that shift. When did that shift start to happen? And then maybe we can go from there.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Fast and Furious scene. I used to, when I would speak on this topic, I would start off by saying, how many of you have seen the Fast and Furious opening scene? And everybody would raise their hand. And I would say, that's the only way that I've never seen cargo stolen in the United States. Right. Great, fun movie, but not reality when it comes to cargo. So, what the real progression has been from straight theft, to, dominating 97% of all cargo theft was straight theft for the majority of my career, to now we've seen strategic theft, which used to be 2 or 3%, now being 30 or 33% of all cargo theft. That's been the real change. And I think it's really taken the industry by storm. I think it's interesting because, as I said, straight theft is still 67 to 70%, depending on what quarter you're looking at and everything like that, of all cargo theft, according to CargoNet numbers, in the United States. But strategic theft goes 1,475% increase in a 3-year period. It goes from roughly 2 or 3% to 30 or 33%. And it gets all the attention right now. It's almost as though we're forgetting that straight theft is 67 to 70% of all cargo theft. Wow. And all we talk about is strategic theft. And I think there's several reasons for that. One, the level of sophistication behind strategic theft is so much that it occupies your thought process and your way. If you're a freight broker, if you're an intermediary, you think about it all day. You think, what's the new method? What's the new technique? What's the new weakness that they found in our system? I mean, it literally must keep these freight brokers. I know a lot of my clients, I feel like it keeps them up at night all the time.
Wow.
Right. And so it gets a ton of attention. I think the other part of it is it targeted a part of the industry, the freight brokers, who traditionally did not have to really deal with cargo theft and did not have to be prepared for cargo theft. They were most of the time they were witnessing cargo theft, either at the shipper and warehouse level or at the carrier level. And they had to help with the communication and getting to the bottom of the theft and really that, but they weren't the target of the theft because they didn't possess the freight. The truckers did, or the warehouse had it and they were targeting the warehouses. Back in the day, 10, 12 years ago, you would have $4 million worth of freight in a warehouse on Friday, and the warehouse manager would come and open up on Monday and the whole place would be empty.
Wow.
I mean, they would go in over a weekend, cut a hole in the wall or cut a hole in the doors, disable the alarm systems, and empty out an entire warehouse over a weekend. We used to see huge warehouse thefts. We don't see that anymore. But the bigger point being, I think the strategic theft is attacking a part of the industry that was not prepared and didn't see it coming and is now scrambling. And it is hitting them with not 1, 2, or 3 methods, but 20 to 30 different methods every day. And you're trying to figure out what's coming next. And you're trying to train people to move freight as efficiently as you can, but hey, also, make sure you don't have a theft, right? And it's just really, it's really made life difficult for the intermediary space. It's really hard to watch them deal with it. I mean that in a sympathetic way. I have clients who, I hate to see them get hit with this type of stuff because it just takes advantage of everything good about the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so let's break it down a little bit. Let's step back a bit. So what are some examples then of straight theft and what are some examples of strategic theft? Just so that we kind of have it straight in our mind of, there's still a majority of straight theft, which is probably pilferage and that the like, and then strategic theft that I've heard you even say you could be working for a company that is a total sham and you would never know it. So what is straight theft and what is strategic theft and what does that kind of look like out in the wild?
Straight theft is called that because it's straightforward, right? They're physically going out and taking it. They're stealing the tractor and trailer or the unmarried trailer and hooking up to it and taking off, or they're pilfering a load, opening the rear doors, taking 2, 3, 4 pallets off the back, things like that. So that's straight theft. It's very old school. There's some slight nuances to some of the things that they do when it comes to tracking and seals and stuff like that. But for the most part, they're just physically going out and stealing it wherever it is, truck stops, drop lots, parking lots, you name it.
Opportunistic theft, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is, but it's targeted also. They'll follow drivers out of distribution centers. They'll sit surveillance on distribution centers for days on end, tracking who comes in and out on a regular basis, following loads out, things like that. So, there's some effort and sophistication behind it on some levels. They'll plant members of their crew in warehouses as employees so that they have access to paperwork and know what loads are moving where and who's delivering what and things like that. So there's some sophistication there, but for the most part, straight theft is straightforward. Strategic theft is when it begins with deception, when the theft begins through some level or some method, even if it's minor, of deception. And the most common methods are, I'm a big stickler for the vernacular, right? It's straight theft and it's strategic theft. Those are the two buckets. That's it. Freight fraud is not a bucket. Listen, I'm fully on board. There is such a thing as freight fraud, but it's not a bucket. Freight fraud is a method of strategic theft. And what that really refers to is MC number fraud, right? And a couple other small categories of fraud that exist in there. But so when you look at the strategic theft bucket, the most prevalent methods right now are double brokering scams, which we've seen an increase in those being involving email breaches, right? They don't need to do the email breaches. And when double brokering scams first came into the industry, it really became prevalent. We weren't seeing a lot of email breaches in the execution of those methods, but we see that and the majority of the time now with double brokering scams. And then the MC number fraud is probably the second most prevalent, if not right there closely with the double brokering scams. Identity theft is still out there, which is the second method of strategic theft ever to hit the United States. When strategic theft came about in somewhere between 2010 and 2013 in the industry. And ironically, I joke about this. In 2013, DZ Patterson and myself stood in front of a room full of people presenting at JJ Southwest Transportation Security Council thing. And we said, hey, we think this strategic thing is going to be a real problem in the future. And we kind of got laughed out of the room, right? We laugh about it now. Yeah. At the time, it wasn't funny. But, people said, yeah, you're overblowing this. It's not that big of a deal. Well, the only method at the time was really fictitious pickup. Wow. And then identity theft popped up shortly thereafter. And it pretty much stuck with those two methods. And I was looking at some old numbers that I used for a presentation. And I want to say it was 2015 or 2017, strategic theft finally, there was enough strategic theft for it finally to be reflected in the numbers. Mm-hmm. It was only like 2 or 3%. And then between 2021 and 2024, wow, 1,475% increase, and it goes up to 33%, like overnight.
Yeah. Is it kind of also in line with things moving from hard copies to paper? I mean, we're going to get into kind of the value that comes from actually being electronic and kind of mitigating of some of the cargo theft. But is that maybe why some of the strategic theft was taking off, and the falsifying of people showing up, and the identity theft type thing? I mean, it wasn't securely locked down, and maybe it was easier to access.
Well, we kind of talked about this before we came on, right? The transportation industry, every day we see new technology in the transportation industry, right? And yet, what is the one piece of paper that dictates everything?
The bill of lading.
Bill of lading.
That's right.
Right. And so all this technology that we see in the transportation industry, and so you have the bill of lading, which dictates almost everything, and the seal. And these two things have been present in the transportation industry for as long as I've been doing this, right? They haven't changed.
Yeah.
Right. Seals have changed a bit, but the theory of a seal on a truck, that hasn't changed, right? So nobody wants to break a seal, right? Because you have all sorts of problems when you break a seal, especially if it's perishable goods or consumables and stuff like that, or cosmetics, any of that kind of stuff, right? So nobody wants to break a seal. And you have a bill of lading that says what's behind that seal is televisions, right? And is it really?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to break the seal to find out. Bill of lading says it's televisions. How is it? You tell me, my friend, how is it going to be moved through the supply chain? As what? Televisions.
Yeah.
Right. So, when strategic theft first started coming around, and even straight theft, we saw bill of lading manipulation, paperwork manipulation, even insurance certificates of insurance, were some of the most falsified documents in the industry for years. But the industry still works off of this type of paperwork for all the technology that we have. And that gives the thieves some advantage. So when you want to launder freight, if you do a double brokering scam and you steal a load of televisions, and then you take it to a cross dock, and that bill of lading going into the cross dock says it's televisions, but the bill of lading coming out of the cross dock says it's red plastic cups. Now it's a load of red plastic cups, right? And then if I take it to another cross dock or another warehouse, and I bring it out and I label it as FAK, freight of all kinds, that's what it is. And if nobody breaks the seal to verify that, I have a load of stolen televisions that now everybody thinks is freight of all kinds or red plastic cups. And that's how it's going to get moved. And so it allows them to take advantage of the system and the way it works. And that's why I say I hate to see, when I see my clients getting hit by some of this stuff, they're operating on a daily basis the way the supply chain's always operated, with some, great enhancements from technology and stuff like that. But the bad guys know how the supply chain works, and they take advantage of some of the old school stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting with the bill of lading. There is a movement toward electronic bill of lading. Do you think that's going to have a significant impact if we were to adopt electronic bills of lading across the supply chain?
I think it'll have some impact. I don't know that I would state it'll be a significant impact, but it'll certainly have an impact. It will, it depends on how good the thieves are at manipulating digital bills of lading. Can they be manipulated? How strong will the security around that be? But I think it's a step that needs to happen. And I think that, when I deal with cargo theft on a daily basis, I could think of numerous cases off the top of my head where if there wasn't an e-bill, they would have had to have done something different, or they wouldn't have been able to commit the theft. Now, the one thing that I know, and that every expert in my field knows, is they will adapt and overcome. They just do. They are not going anywhere. People say we need to end cargo theft. Unfortunately, cargo theft is never going to end. Right? Can we reduce it? Can we make it difficult? Can we make them work harder for it? Absolutely. I definitely think it can be reduced. 100% I think it can be reduced. But is it ever going to go away? No, it's never going to go away.
Yeah. Well, and part of that reduction of the cargo theft is the overall awareness, right? The more people know the trends to look for, the current things that the bad guys are doing, they can spot it, they can get that, that hair standing up on the back of their neck, and they can recognize that as something is going on here. And this is where I've heard you say many times before, that's where you reach out to cargo theft experts right then, because if you don't, you might lose your split second. I mean, it's not actually a split second, but you kind of miss that small window.
Timing is everything, right? I mean, time is of the essence with cargo theft. A lot of people say it's like that, that TV show, the first 48 or whatever, right? But it's more than that. It's the first 24. It's the first 5 or 6. Education. If we take a step back and we talk about the first thing you touched on, which is education. Just look at, you and I came together, and I start speaking on the topic at the MICA meetings and educating people on cargo theft. How many of your members reached out to me after that, immediately when something felt wrong or whatever? And that was all based on education, right? Hey, we educated them on things to look for, things to be aware of, and hey, you have to reach out right away. Mm-hmm. So education is absolutely critical. You have to educate your employees. I just spoke about this. All too often in the company, we concentrate the knowledge around cargo theft or supply chain security in 1, 2, or 3 people. But they're not the people assigning the freight, working at the docks, handing the freight off to the trucking companies. They're not on the front lines, right? Imagine, the coach of a football team knows everything about football, but they don't teach their players the plays. Imagine how chaotic it would be on the field. This is that. Right? If you are the expert in your company, or it's your responsibility, your job, number one job should be educating your entire team that cargo theft is a problem. Here's what you have to look for. Here's what you have to be aware of. And whenever we do that, we see these kind of results where people start to pick up the phone. Now, when you continue on the conversation, you talk about time is of the essence. A few months back, I had a friend call me and say, hey, I have a load. I think it's a double brokering scam, and it's a high value load, and I need your help. And I said, okay, when was it picked up? It was only a matter of hours, right? Like half a day. And the driver was giving him one location. I started to get involved. And, we figure out the real location of the driver. I reach out to some law enforcement contacts I had. They responded immediately, thankfully, and they rolled up on them as they were offloading the freight.
Wow.
30 minutes later, and we would have missed the load.
Yep. Wow.
Right? 30 minutes. Yep. And so that's how tight it can be sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I mean, even just once they've offloaded, this is something that you've said, the top 3 categories are energy drinks, alcohol, and meat, and perishable, kind of proteins. And one thing that really stuck with me is a lot of times, you take off a label, that meat doesn't have a QR code itself or a UPC, right? I mean, those are like, once it's repackaged, that's gone. And the other scary part of that is, if that's seafood going out there, you don't want seafood necessarily in the wrong hands, and then all of a sudden getting into the common, societal food chain, or alcohol or beverages, at that matter. You kind of trust that it was always in the right hands. And so having this cargo theft happen on these types of goods, and for them to be the highest hit commodities.
Yeah, it's they love perishables for, they love that food and beverage category, right? We saw that come into the number 1 spot in 2010, and it's been there, when all things are normal, it'll be the number 1 thing. Now, we've seen some shifts here and there around COVID and stuff like that, right? But when all things are normal in cargo theft, food and beverage is going to be your number 1 targeted commodity. Why? Because what happens to the evidence? It's consumed, right? It's hard to trace. It's easy to move. And also, they know how the bad guys know how the industry reacts to cargo theft. Meaning, even if I recover your load of meat and the seal's broken, what's going to happen to it? We're going to destroy it, right? Somebody's going to want it destroyed. They're not going to want to put back in the supply chain, to your point. So they know that, and they know that as a result of that, the industry doesn't pursue a load of meat or seafood as long as they would, or as hard as they would pursue a load of televisions or tablets or gaming consoles or metals or tires or any of that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. And it, and maybe this is true, maybe it isn't, but it feels like, at least in the very, very short time that I've been even paying attention to all of this, it feels like there is more of an effort to pursue. I mean, it's all margins related, but it feels like there's more of an effort to pursue some of these perishable commodities, only because then it can help prevent the next theft, right? And so, trying to kind of get activated on what's happening, understanding the whole system a little bit more, and then using that to prevent, whether it's you getting involved to learn what's happening and learn the trends, but then also it feels like the shippers and the cargo owners are kind of following suit in there.
Yeah, I think that, the industry is to a boiling point with cargo theft. They've just gotten to a point where they want to see bad guys go to jail. They want to see cargo theft reduced. So we do see, I think, a good, stick with it type mentality, even when, if I go back to some of the MICA members that I've worked with, there's a mentality, hey, we want this bad guy caught. Even though if you recover the load for us, Scott, we're probably going to have to destroy it or whatever. We want the bad guys to go to jail, right? And, recently NYPD and some federal agencies had some really big busts, and New Jersey had some really big busts over in that Northeast area. And, I was told directly that some of the interaction that your members had with law enforcement and some of the information that they supplied helped in that major case and resulted in some of the arrests that have happened, right? Or partially resulted in some of the arrests that have happened. And that's great to see, right? It's great to see that mentality in the industry of, yeah, I might not ever, get made right on this load, but I certainly want to see the bad guys go to jail. Right.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of this, we're all in this together, right? And, the bad guys are banding together. The good guys might as well band together to try to combat them. So,
Right.
I want to go back a little bit to the electronic bills of lading and certainly kind of the technological advances there. AI, how do you think that AI can be used for tracking trends and certainly kind of scanning systems to see anomalies and identify them? Is that something that you think might have an opportunity here? I mean, on the one hand, we are still a paper-based industry, the entire supply chain. So we're going to have to move from paper-based in order to have AI really kind of be helpful there. But, on the one hand, you might say bills of lading, paper bills of lading, if they are being modified, now they can be modified with a little bit more higher level of authenticity, faking. But on the other hand, too, can we use AI for good to try to monitor and scan for those trends?
So the AI topic has been a big question over the last couple of years. And I'm certainly not an AI or cyber expert, right? I have a working man's knowledge of it as it relates to cargo theft and what I see with it. Something I've been saying for a while is, in the end, it's going to be AI versus AI. When it comes to the use of AI, right? It's going to be who's better at the use of AI, who's better at training AI to detect it or block it, who's better at training AI for nefarious reasons to breach systems. And I think one of the things that people may not realize well enough is that when you look at the fact that strategic theft, when we saw that massive increase in strategic theft here in the United States, it was not driven by local crews. That was driven by international crime rings operating from over a dozen or 24 different countries, pulling the strings and using strategic theft as their method of choice because they could be anywhere and target freight anywhere. And in doing that, they like to use technology. I mentioned earlier with the double brokering schemes, we see a lot of use of email compromise, social engineering, phishing emails, things like that in that method and in some of the other methods too. So AI is a natural tool. And a lot of those, even when you talk about the phishing emails and social engineering emails, they use AI to generate those. They use AI to send those out all day and barrage your employees with them all day, every day, right? And so, AI is definitely becoming a thing in this. It will definitely play a role. but the use of AI to block it and combat it will also become significant. So that's going to be something that I think we absolutely need to keep an eye on. And I think, going back to my point about this being perpetrated by these international rings, there's a lot of speculation that some of those rings have ex-military people from other countries in there, cyber, ex-military people that were cyber experts involved in this and everything like that. So I feel like it could become, a very advanced part of all this.
Mm-hmm.
The jury's still out. We're still watching it mature every day. We're watching it used more. Certainly, to your point about manipulating documents, absolutely, all day. We definitely see the use of that, but also to create fake driver's licenses, to manipulate driver's licenses and identification, things like that. So we've even seen that they use it to disguise their voice, right? So if a bad guy from another country is calling somebody in Tennessee, they'll put a Tennessee accent with the use of AI, so they sound like they're local. They'll put a Southern accent, or if you're in the Northeast, they'll put a New York or Boston or Brooklyn accent on, things like that. My father's from Brooklyn. I always say there's a difference between a Brooklyn accent and a New York accent, right? Things like that. So, and people can detect it, right? So, yeah, AI is definitely going to become a problem. So it's really going to be about how can we use AI to combat that.
Yeah. I want to go back to the MC numbers. We talked about that a little bit, and this is something that I've heard you talk about before, where there are some of the bad guys out there going out and they might buy up 200 MC numbers, and they'll use 100 of them for a legitimate business purpose for a while. And this industry, supply chain generally, I feel like is so built on trust, built on relationships, built on, kind of, it feels like integrity and honesty, right? Like kind of all the old tenets of just good old business. And they'll use that against people in the industry where you don't even know that on the, last Saturday, they were burning an MC number by trying to go grab a load through a straight theft. So talk a little bit more about that. And that's the example, I guess, I remember you saying of you can sometimes work for these companies and not know that you are being part of a long-term plan set up for theft.
Yeah, cargo thieves are very patient, right? And they always have a plan and a strategy in place. Straight theft a lot of times can still be opportunistic, sometimes planned, as we talked about earlier, but strategic theft is always very planned. And when we first started seeing the purchase of the MC numbers, the late Jeff Hall, God rest his soul, was a dear friend, and I always go back to the story where, he called me one day and he said, "Hey, I have an informant. He's got some really interesting information. I want you to hear it because I need your thoughts." And we talked to a guy who said, "Hey, so-and-so just purchased, 400, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I think it was 412 MC numbers." And he goes, "I'm not sure what he's going to do with it, but I know it's not going to be good. I thought you guys would want to know." He gave us some of the MC numbers that he knew of. And he got off the phone and Jeff and I were talking, and Jeff said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I would take half of them and I would operate normally and gain people's trust for them. And I'd take the other half of them and I'd go steal with them. And then when I burned all those, I'd flip the switch on the ones that people are now trusting, and I'd steal even more loads." And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, right? And Jeff agreed. We both were on the same page as usual. And that's what we've seen over time, right? And I just the other day I was looking at a case. Gary Thomas and I were looking at a case where we think that's exactly what happened. The company said, "Hey, we've been giving these loads to this company for months. We've had no issues." And as far as we could tell, the MC number was purchased months ago, not recently, right? But one of the loads just went missing. It's a very, high value load. It's not one of mine or anything like that, but it's somebody who reached out to me for help. And as far as we could tell, they purchased the MC number months ago, and they've been hauling and delivering the loads, for months, so that they can get the routes, the communications, paperwork look like, how many questions are we asked, how many loads are we going to get assigned, all these things. And then they just one day decide, okay, let's start stealing them,
That's wild. It's so wild. I mean, so and it can be that easy, right? For the transfer and buying and selling of MC numbers. So there is a little bit of an effort going forward to try to solve that. There is a larger effort going forward on the Hill under the Corca bill. So that's the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. That is really interesting. One of the things that you've talked about, and we'll dive into this a little bit more later, but is the cargo reporting numbers and the inconsistent kind of offenses that they sometimes get categorized under. And so it can be hard to accurately track how many cargo thefts are happening because it might be reported as a general theft, or it might be recorded as a freight fraud, or it might be, whatever the different police department has, they might be recording it differently. Speak to that a little bit, and then we can jump into Corca.
Yeah, there's really no reporting category for cargo theft for law enforcement unless there's a state one, right? Like California has some of their own state statutes. Different states have some of their own state statutes, but there's no federal reporting category for it in the UCC, Uniform Criminal Reporting System, right? And so a law enforcement officer in Iowa who has never worked cargo theft, or not picking on Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, you name it, that don't really deal with cargo theft, they may report it as an auto theft, right? Because technically there's an auto involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another law enforcement officer in another state may report it as some kind of property crime, you name the category. And so the numbers get diluted. Cargo theft numbers have for years been diluted into all these other categories of crime. And so when you look at the numbers that are out there, I always use CargoNet. I still think it's the best resource. They do the best trending. There's a couple other companies out there that do that as well. But I'm a big user of CargoNet for the numbers and the statistics. And I think that when you look at their numbers, I think you're getting a sample size. I think you're getting, I've always said, and CargoNet has never corrected me or disagreed with me, I think you're getting 1/10 of all full truckload thefts, 1/15 of all cargo thefts if you're including pilferages, right? And so, if you get a report from them that's 4,000, just using an easy number, if you get a report from them, an annual report that's 4,000 or 3,600, I think it was the last one, or 3,700, multiply that by 15, I think you're in the neighborhood, right? There's been a couple of articles that have come out recently stating that the Corca bill is not necessary because cargo theft's being overblown. And, when you look at the numbers that CargoNet supplies, they're minuscule compared to the amount of loads that move across the country. Well, those people that wrote those articles, they obviously didn't do their homework. I mean, the first question in my mind would be, why am I getting these numbers from a company called CargoNet and not from the federal government? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because the federal government doesn't track it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, okay. And then if I look at the CargoNet numbers, which again, I'm a big fan of, they give us good trending. I find out that it's based on voluntary reporting. And that tells me right there that I'm not getting all the cargo thefts, right? And, when the article says, well, all cargo thefts are reported to law enforcement, I agree. I think the majority of cargo thefts are reported to law enforcement. But I go back to my earlier point. They're not being categorized as cargo theft. So we don't know what the cargo theft numbers are that are being reported to law enforcement. So the Corca bill is important because one of the key things it does is it mandates that the federal government track cargo theft in its own category. And so I think that's one of the most critical parts of the bill.
Yeah. And when I've talked to non-cargo theft, even non-supply chain people, just people on the Hill or people in DC generally, they're surprised to learn that there isn't a good method for tracking this because it is becoming such a hot button issue for everybody.
Right.
And once we get some real handle on the numbers there, then we can also get a handle on the loss and the cost that it goes to, everyday average consumers that are out there. I mean, this is probably, it's got to be in the 10, 25, 50 cent, maybe a couple dollars worth of savings of how much cargo theft is happening. We just don't know, right? That we don't have good numbers to base those analyses on.
Yeah, well, again, if you take the CargoNet numbers, I think last year's annual report had the dollar figure somewhere around 730 million.
Wow.
So if I'm right,
yeah,
and we just go by full truckload and we multiply that number by 10.
Yeah.
It's a pretty significant number.
That's right. Yeah. And if that had been entered into society appropriately, you wouldn't see the losses with the companies, and then the overall consumer product number, dollar amount that you'd be paying at the wherever you're buying would arguably be lower.
Well, an important part of that too is that's not even the real number, meaning,
Mhm.
So TAPA, which I'm
Yep.
currently lucky to serve as the chairman of TAPA, we're in the process of vetting some universities that we may work with to create a study for the industry on what is the true value of a cargo theft,
Mhm.
because the industry really doesn't know. And we think that's a valuable tool to bring to the industry. We're just going to donate it to the industry. We're just going to create the study with the university of our choosing, and we're going to give this study out to the industry because, the example I always give is, let's say you're moving gaming consoles in November, Christmas season, right? And you have a load of gaming consoles stolen. And let's say the retail value on that is labeled as 400,000, just using an easy number. Is that the value of that load? No. Now you're not on the shelf next to your competitor.
Mhm.
So your competitor probably gets the sale
Mhm.
versus you, right? You have to remanufacture those.
Mhm.
You have to reship those. You have to put an insurance claim in on those. You have costs to investigate those. So it's not a $400,000 loss.
Mhm.
It's
Much
3x that, 2x that, 4x that, whatever the formula ends up being that we figure out when we do that study is going to be critical to the industry, because that $730 million number is the retail value most of the time, or the invoice value, right? And so it doesn't even scratch the surface on what the true value of the cargo theft is. And to your point, all of those costs are passed on to you and I.
Mhm.
We're paying for all that, right? And when you look at food and beverage is the number one targeted commodity in the country, and people say, look at the price of groceries.
Yeah. 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 It's not the only thing that'll bring it down, but it certainly will have an impact with these
Oh,
numbers
for
that we
sure.
we just don't have a good handle on.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
even further reason why it's so damaging having reports come out that say cargo theft is not a real problem, or not as big of a problem as people say, because ask any shipper out there, and if they haven't been hit yet, yeah, hopefully they won't be hit, but they're thinking about it, like you said. And all of the intermediaries that are working the load movement, I mean, they are, like you said, losing sleep over this. So, unfortunately, it's something that is happening far and wide, and something that's impacting everybody in the supply chain in one respect or the other.
Yep.
You mentioned TAPA. I do want to give you a moment to talk about TAPA, talk about the value, talk about the benefits. So you are the chair of TAPA Americas, Transported Asset Protection Association. Tell me a little bit more about TAPA and what it does.
It's a fantastic organization. I've been involved in it, I think, for 14 or 15 years. Worked my way up from just being a member to being on committees to being on the board, and now, lucky enough to be the chairman. And I served as vice chair for 4 years under Alan Gear, who was a great chairman. And it's a nonprofit organization. And I always like to make a point of that because, we don't have a commercial angle. We're not trying to profit or make a bunch of money off of people or the industry or anything like that. And, the biggest thing we do is we bring supply chain security standards to the industry. So we have the TSR, transportation security requirements, the FBSR, freight broker security requirements, cyber facility. We're coming out with parking standards, things like that. And so we create those standards for the industry. You can get TAPA certified on those standards. You can use that to generate business, showing that you take security a bit more serious than everybody else, right? And use that to kind of stand out in the industry. We also host the two largest cargo theft summits in the country, the National Cargo Theft Summit, which takes place in May. This year we did that in Atlanta, and it looks like it'll be in Atlanta for the next 3 or 4 years. And the T2 Solutions Summit, which takes place in Phoenix this year, November 11th and 12th. So watch for that to be announced and get on the list for that. And if you're a member, you get to, don't quote me on this because Cindy always yells at me, I get it wrong. But I think if you're a member, you get to bring 4 people to each of the summits for free as part of your
Right.
membership, right? And if you want to bring more, you have to pay. The organization is led by some of the brightest minds and some of the brightest people in this field. You have the head of security for some of the largest freight brokers, trucking, shippers in the country or on the planet serving on this board. And so I'm flattered to be working with those people, just a tremendous pool of knowledge that manages that board. You have Cindy Rosen, who's our executive director, who's really the backbone of the whole thing. She just makes her and her team keep the whole thing running and spinning and everything like that. But, this last, our membership has grown. So if cargo theft isn't a problem, why has our membership grown over 30% for the last 3 years? Why is every summit that we host standing room only, right? Why every time I speak about cargo theft, and I say, if 6-7 years ago when I would speak, I'd say, hey, everybody in the room that's had to deal with cargo theft, raise your hand. Maybe 10 people in the room would raise their hand. Now I have a room of 400 and 80% of the room raises their hand, right? Why is an organization like Micah reaching out to me about cargo theft? Why does the TIA do so much for its members around cargo theft, right? And the ATA and the TC and all these other organizations. So yeah, TAPA is a fantastic organization. If you're a global entity, like I know you guys deal with a lot of shippers and ocean marine, there's TAPA Americas, there's TAPA EMEA, which is our sister chapter, which is covers Europe, and then TAPA APAC, which covers the Asia Pacific area. So anywhere on the planet that you move freight, you can be covered by TAPA and be a member of the most relevant or all of the chapters, so that you can be up to date on the latest intel. We have intel services, we have tracking services, data tracking services. We have alliances with companies like CargoNet that provide data to us, stuff like that. So TAPA is a great resource for education. We do all sorts of webinars. We have a law enforcement committee that works directly with law enforcement, liaisons with law enforcement. Our last summit, we were over 400 people in attendance, and we had our largest law enforcement class of 65 attend. And that was federal, local, state, regional, Canadian, right? So, it's a great organization. If you're not a member and you're dealing with the supply chain and supply chain security, you absolutely should be a member.
That's great. And that's so key too, beyond all of the benefits, just facilitating all of those stakeholders in the same room, having that conversation, the biggest conference you said of this kind, and you have it twice a year, getting those people in the room so that they are current and relevant and sharing information on trends that they're seeing too, so that you can see, if somebody has we're starting to see this one little funky thing next year, 30 people have that happen, and you can watch those trends in real time. So really, really fantastic group. And one thing that I've seen from engagement with TAPA is just the sheer education value too. The things that not everybody is at stage 100, right? A lot of people are still at step 1, 2, 3, trying to learn, okay, I know that this is a problem. I just want to get a little baseline. You have some of that education online already. And so TAPA is just such a great first stop. If you're kind of trying to figure out, look, cargo theft is becoming an issue for me. I don't necessarily want to go out there and tell all my customers that it's a problem, right? That we've seen that where some companies don't like to be named because they don't want to admit to having problems or don't be somehow seen less capable than their competitors. Look, everybody has a cargo theft problem these days, whether they've been hit or not, right? Everybody is making mitigation efforts, or should be. And if they're not, that's a problem too. They should be cutting edge on the education side of things.
Yeah, it's with the rise and the sudden rise of cargo theft, a lot of companies, people that were really safety managers are being given you're now responsible for cargo theft too, right? And we get a lot of that in the attendee group of people who are, I was just given this responsibility with my company. I don't really know anything about it. Somebody directed me to TAPA. I'm super glad I came to this conference. It was very educational. I made a lot of contacts. That's one of the great things that comes out of these summits too, is you get to meet the law enforcement people that are trying to find your freight or put the bad guys in jail. And law enforcement finds a lot of resources, people that can help them with understanding how some of the freight moves, or getting paperwork, or getting contacts with other companies. There's times when law enforcement hits warehouses, right? And there's millions of dollars of freight in that warehouse and it has to get moved, right? And, sometimes I've had law enforcement reach out to me and go, can you help me get this moved? And I reach out immediately to one of the members of the board and say, who's head of security for a big trucking company, and say, hey, this is what's going on. Can you help them? Yep. We'll get trucks over there, within an hour. Right. I mean, that's the kind of collaboration you get by being part of organizations like this.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I've heard nothing but fantastic things about your TAPA conferences. So applause to you guys for hosting just fantastic opportunities for those conversations. So, we've talked a lot about kind of the full supply chain here. A lot of things that my listeners are dealing with is that interchange between the port itself, the carrier dropping off the load onto the yard, but then where the problem starts to creep in is not within the yard, but it's once it starts to leave the yard. The ports themselves have really great security mechanisms, but it's that interchange piece. So let's talk a little bit about that drayage component, but then even sometimes the warehouse. What are some things to look for? Where are some kind of pinch points or pain points or opportunities for convenience opportunities for theft? Talk about that piece.
Yeah, the weakest link in the supply chain right now is the point of exchange of the freight, right? Where the shipper is handing it to the carrier. That's the weakest link right now. And that's why when you look at the CargoNet numbers and it says, where is cargo theft happening? It says warehouse. That's not warehouse break-ins. That's the freight being handed off at the warehouse, right? And shippers need to get more involved in this. And we are seeing several big shippers really start to take notice and realize that they play an important role in this, and they have to pay better attention to who are they actually handing the freight to at the dock, who is showing up at their dock, are they helping to verify those people, are they cooperating with their freight broker and everything like that. If the freight broker tells you ABC Trucking is coming to the dock and XYZ Trucking shows up and just says, well, I'm here on behalf of ABC Trucking, just stop. Just stop for a minute, right? And, people say, well, we're trying to move freight quickly. And I always say, what's going to slow you down more? Picking up the phone, calling the freight broker and verifying, or having a theft and having to deal with that theft for the next 30, 60, 90 days, right? What's going to slow you down more? So shippers, we really need to see shippers take a more active role in that exchange of freight and the security aspects around that and the verification. There's some really good tools coming out. One we talked about earlier, a company called Verified Carrier that not only helps vet carriers, but they also have a product called Verified Pickup now, which basically tells you, yes, this driver is the right driver, it's the right truck, they're insured, they're with the company that was vetted, things like that. It's a great tool. There's a couple other companies coming out with similar tools like that, but there's a movement in the industry towards different technology, different tools like that, and that's critical. Again, there has to be human touch. There has to be some human intuition involved in all this, but tools like that are great tools. I think when it comes to the ports, you're 100% correct. Since 9/11, really, the ports are locked down. We don't see, there's pilferage that happens at the ports here and there, but we don't see a lot of full outright theft at the ports. But again, there's some weaknesses in the exchange or the handoff of some, auto haulers are getting hit really hard right now by theft. And we've seen some incidents where people are able to easily fake, that they're the right person to pick up this vehicle from the port, right? And the vehicle's handed off to them, things like that. So there's a little bit of weakness there. But, I think there's also, we talked earlier about are people losing track of the fact that straight theft is still the number one method of cargo theft. Drayage is an important part of that, right? Because if you're a trucking company and you have a pool of designated drivers that have TWIC cards that go in and out of the port for you all day, a lot of times what companies will do is they go in, they get that load, they bring it out, they drop it in a drop lot outside the port so that another driver can come pick it up, take it to the distribution center or the warehouse or its final destination or whatever. Well, a lot of those drop lots are not secure in any way, shape, or form. They're commingled, meaning there's 3, 4, 5 different companies using them. There's no control over ingress and egress. And it literally becomes a buffet line for cargo for the bad guys. And they will just in broad daylight go in there and hook onto a load and off they go.
Yeah.
And it becomes very easy for them. So we do see cargo theft and drayage. People think, wow, it's only a short distance, doesn't go very far, so they probably don't see theft. We see plenty of theft in that space.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense too. A little bit of convenient shortcut, right, can then create that crimes of convenience opportunities, right? They
Yes.
just see an open lot where they see a lot of, like you said, unmarried trucks and just sitting there ready to, the cargo loads ready to be pulled by somebody. So, and nobody really monitoring it. But because you're in eyesight, maybe you kind of have this false sense of security,
Right.
but you're outside the perimeter of the security of the port. So, that's interesting though, what you were saying about the cars coming in and maybe even project cargo, but those one-offs. So there's a system in place, right, for drayage providers to have the TWIC card, but those one-offs, and I think that that's something that ports probably do need to pay a little more attention to. It's probably still rare, but as with any rare cargo theft, component, once they see an opportunity that's successful, they're going to pounce on it, continue to pounce on it.
Yeah, they pressure test methods all the time, right? And once they find success, they just keep coming, right? I always say they're like water running down your roof looking for a crack, right? And they find that crack and it just starts to pour in.
Yeah.
And that's really how they operate. So I think it's important that these things be paid attention to. And listen, when it's a 200, they're not going after the $30,000 car, they're going after the $250,000 car,
Right.
the $300,000 car, the $500,000 car. So, those are not small hits.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you'd mentioned the New York, New Jersey, and some of the big cargo theft rings. I think it was the Godfather's cargo ring that was, reported or how I saw it sensationalized. And when we talked shortly after that happened, and you had said, there was some work from some information from some of the members of the Meat Import Council that had helped with that. The other thing that you said that really kind of stuck with me is sometimes hits or captures like this can also be a bad thing. I mean, they're obviously a good thing, but they can sometimes be a bad thing because then sometimes the bad guys want to show you didn't actually get us, right? And so then you have to be extra prepared. You can't let your guard down. You have to be extra prepared for the next thing that they might try to do to show you might have gotten 5 guys, but you didn't get the 50.
Well, this goes back to, the head of the snake is overseas. So the people that are being arrested around here are really, regional managers and worker bees, right? And that's not, law enforcement's doing a fantastic job with these, right? But it's difficult when the head of the snake is overseas. And ironically, with some of the big busts that we've seen recently, the week following or the 2 weeks following, we see an uptick.
That's wild.
In fact, and it's almost like they're taking revenge, or they're angry and they just lash out at the industry on it, or they're trying to say, you got some of us beating, get all of us, right? And so, the first quarter numbers from CargoNet, a lot of people said, well, this is the first reduction in cargo theft that we've seen in a while. It wasn't. That was a lot of people reading the data incorrectly, right? Meaning there was a reduction in reported incidents. CargoNet tracks all incidents, whether they have an actual theft tied to them or not, meaning it could be suspicious activity, it could be a failed attempt, all that. So incidents went down, but incidents involving cargo theft went up. So all these arrests, which, God bless our law enforcement officers out there on these task forces and all across the country, NYPD, New Jersey, CTIPS, LAPD, all these other task forces that are just making bust after bust lately. They're fantastic groups, and they're doing yeoman's work. But cargo theft hasn't gone down. It hasn't gone down.
Yeah. So one last kind of obtuse question. What is the wildest cargo theft story you have? And maybe it's not even the wildest one, but what's the wildest one that you can share that maybe in recent memory?
I don't have a wild one. I don't have a wild one because everybody thinks that they're all crazy, right? I think, some of the high tech ones we're seeing lately are a bit crazy, right? We see $30 million memory module server equipment stolen, right? And those loads are double brokered, triple brokered, quadruple brokered. Like, how are we letting that happen?
Yeah.
That's some wild stuff, right? But a funny one that I always go back to that's a bit nostalgic was years and years ago. I had probably been doing cargo theft for 10 years. and I thought I knew it all, and I thought I'd seen it all. I was young, and I was like, I know everything about cargo theft, and I know what they steal, I know what they won't steal. And my buddy called me up and he goes, "Hey, we have a load of stolen pigs." And I said, "You mean ham?" And he goes, "Nope, live pigs, load of stolen live pigs." And I said, "You're kidding me." "Nope, load of live stolen pigs." So we end up recovering the load.
Wow.
And I remember thinking to myself, I will never think that I know everything about what will be stolen and what
What
won't
they're looking
ever
for.
again.
That's so funny.
So lesson learned, right?
Oh, that's wild. That's wild. So, all right, last question. If any listener listening here, and this is broad category, what do you do when you start to suspect a cargo theft? There's probably people listening now who are thinking, just the other day something felt a little off. What do they do? Right? That's always the disconnect. How do they take that first step?
Before you have that theft, you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan on what you will do, it will be miserable for you. It will be miserable for you. I go back to my football analogy. Imagine me, I've coached football for decades. Imagine me not having any practices and not having a playbook, showing up Friday night lights. Hey, we're going to draw plays in the dirt right before the game, and we'll see if they work. It's not going to go well, right? So you must have a plan in place. This is what we will do if we think we have a cargo theft. Now, when you have that cargo theft, the first thing you have to know is who to call. You have to know how to file a police report. A lot of times filing police reports is one of the most difficult parts of that response, right? Getting law enforcement to understand what happened. Know the experts to call. I always offer, like I've offered your members and stuff like that. Like, you can reach out to me. You don't have to be my customer. I'll help you. I'll get you hooked up with the right people or give you some direction and stuff like that. And that's just because I can't stand the bad guys and I want to see them lose, right? But know the task force numbers so that you can call the task forces directly. If you have a theft in California, you want to talk to a task force member, right? And get direction from them. If you have a theft in New Jersey, you want to talk to a task force member. So know who to contact. Respond immediately. Don't take anything for granted. If they tell you, "Oh, we're having a mechanical failure," unfortunately nowadays, that's an indication that they're trying to delay you from responding to a theft. So if it ends up being a mechanical failure, great. That's actually a good day in today's world, right? If it's not a mechanical failure, you need to be involved right away. So don't hesitate. Respond immediately. Get involved. Know who to call.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for explaining and walking through and illuminating the really mystical world it feels like sometimes of supply chain. You know that it's happening, but you don't really know what to do about it. And hopefully this has helped some of the listeners to learn a little bit more about what to look for. They know that TAPA has some resources to continue the efforts on learning more about it, to make those plans and to really kind of understand it, so that they have a game plan in place. So great advice overall. Well, thanks so much, Scott. Great to see you. And we'll be seeing you out there. Stay busy, because that means you're getting the bad guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
A big thank you to Scott Cornell for joining me. I think one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is just how different modern cargo theft can look from perhaps the traditional image that most people have in their heads, right? Sometimes it is still just a trailer that's stolen from a parking lot or cargo physically taken from a truck. And actually, more often than not, it's still that. But increasingly, it is this identity theft, fraudulent paperwork, compromised accounts, legitimate drivers being manipulated into delivering the shipment directly to the criminal. And when those crimes cross companies, states, and jurisdictions, it becomes much more difficult for any one investigator or agency to see that full picture. Isn't that wild that we don't have really great numbers on how much cargo theft is actually happening out there? Look, that's where the work of organizations like TAPA Americas comes in, bringing together cargo owners, carriers, brokers, insurers, security professionals, and law enforcement. It's also why Scott and others have been pushing for this Corca. Many people in the industry are looking at Corca and really fully supporting it. And hopefully we get it passed and through so we can have some real reporting, some real numbers among the many other benefits that Corca will provide. Perhaps a more coordinated federal response as well. Look, I really enjoyed having Scott on. He is the king of cargo theft mitigation out there. I encourage you to follow him and really, really listen to what he has to say, because he has lived and breathed this for quite some time now. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Want to go deeper on these topics or bring this kind of insight to your team? Visit themaritimprofessor.com to explore corporate trainings, tailored briefings, and on-demand webinars, all designed to make complex maritime regulations practical and easy to understand. And if you or your organization needs help navigating the legal or strategic side of ocean shipping, head over to Squall Strategies. That's where I provide consulting services, regulatory guidance, and policy support for clients working across the global supply chain. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So until next time, I'm Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.